What is the best artificial light for growing plants? That is a very good question with a very complex answer. Narrator, would you please break this down for me?
Well, it highly depends on what you're growing. In general, every plant benefits most from the light it can absorb most efficiently. Natural sunlight has a few things about it that make it special: intensity, broad spectrum, and intensity of each individual spectrum. While sunlight is intense and has more than enough of spectral output than you could need, it is just that, inefficient. In terms of necessity, that is. You don't need to completely replicate what sunlight is to grow plants indoors. Plants are green because green chlorophyll reflects and transmits green light. This makes them appear green to the human eye. This also means at the same time it absorbs light outside that green spectrum instead. Opposite to that are red and blue light. Plants absorb light mostly in these two spectrums. Blue light alone promotes vegetative growth, keeping plants short and bushy with lush leaves and tight internodal spacing, which prevents reaching and thin, weak stems, while red light promotes flowering and fruiting. Both of these processes are driven by the production of chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, which in a term we call photosynthesis. Blue light is easiest absorbed by the plant and is also more easily transmitted through the lower leaves shaded by the top canopy, while red light is in highest demand by the plant. While you have those two main chlorophyll pigments, there are other pigments called accessory pigments. One to mention is keratin B. This absorbs in part some green light, so plants can use other parts of the spectrum other than just blue or red light, but the purpose of it is very minor, as well as the amount needed, and becomes insignificant when replicating artificially what plants need. UV light, on the other hand, is not necessary, but it does drive a plant to protect itself by production of essential oils and resins. This greatly enhances smell and flavor of herbs, for example. There are greenhouses that actually force produce these oils specifically to harvest them. This is essentially the plant producing its own sunscreen as needed. Plants also use far red light, but not so much infrared light, as infrared is basically heat and is more damaging than useful of anything, similar to too much UV light. So how do we choose what light to use? Well, plants that are short, such as lettuce, do not need light with high penetrating power, while taller plants, such as tomatoes, do. Plenty of different kinds of lights are capable of growing plants. T12, T8, and T5 fluorescents also are available in high output and very high output versions. You also have compact fluorescents, HID lights, whether it be metal halide or high pressure sodium. Then you also have newer technologies such as plasma, induction, or very highly talked up ceramic metal halide. Then there is a continuing development of technology that everyone should know by now, LED lighting. Notice how I left out incandescents? Over 90% of the energy they produce is heat, not light. It's by far the worst option for growing plants. Many people associate the heat they feel from the sunlight as its strong intensity, but you don't need radiant heat for photosynthesis. Heat does cause plants to transpire, but not directly related to absorbable light. In fact, you can actually burn plants with too much light and zero heat. HID, or high-intensity discharge lights, produce lots of intense light and penetrate deep into the canopy of tall plants, but much of the energy consumed is lost to heat. Also, a large percentage of that light is actually outside the peak red and blue spectrums, so while it may be a better option in some cases, it's not efficient. Fluorescent lighting can be a very good choice as it radiates very little heat and can be made to produce a much better usable spectrum for plants. However, it has very poor penetrating power as is better suited for shorter plants such as lettuce. And this brings us to what we are doing in this video by comparing LED lighting.
Okay, so if you're still with me, if you've ever searched grow light or indoor grow on the internet, you're likely going to find the vast majority of pictures, articles, and videos. It's all about growing marijuana. I mean, that's like the first things that are going to come up. On one hand, this is overwhelming. On the other hand, it can be very educational, since there's actually a lot to know about growing anything indoors, really. But the supply and demand has literally driven people to become closet experts, if you will. And what they do is they turn their information to the internet after they've done their growing. So their knowledge and testing using the scientific method, they post it for everyone to see online. And the market has also driven manufacturers to research and design LED lighting specifically for this particular purpose. So it has a large impact on the economy, as well as giving people something they can relate to better learn about the hobby of growing indoor plants, growing plants indoors. So there's a few things I wanted to talk about here as far as what I wanted to show you and what this video is about. So what this video is about comparing two different LED lights. they're both 50 watts, okay? But before we get into those, let me kind of describe how LED lighting came to be for growing plants. So a long time ago, LED lighting was pretty weak. You know, the first LEDs were red. They put out hardly any light really, but they used very little power. And over the years, they have developed a lot in that technology, and they've become brighter. They use less wattage than incandescent bulbs. They're way more efficient. And the development of those has really increased over the past decade or so. So there's versions between grow lights, and these in particular that you're looking at are called chip on board COBs, and both of these here are the exact same, virtually the same light, the exact same housing and everything. And the only difference between these is just that this one over here is a white LED, and this one here is a red-blue LED, which actually comes out to be like a pink purplish light. The only difference between the lights, other than the color, is that this one here, the blue-red, only pulls 38 watts from the wall. This one here is a white LED that pulls 50 watts from the wall. So why is this important? Well, the blue-red light here was designed for growing lights indoors, or growing plants indoors. So the reason why that would say 38 watts when it says it's a 50-watt chip is because there are actually there's 50 total 1-watt diodes on the chip within that little square, and 10 of those are blue and 40 of them are red. This one over here, they're all white, but a white LED is actually nothing more than a blue LED with a white phosphor coating, and that actually breaks the light down to more of a full spectrum depending on what color temperature you get. I don't want to get too much into that, but I believe this one is 5500K, which is just about the same as daylight, and that's going to give you the the full spectrum. So you get across the board from 400 to 700 nanometer. It's very, very minimal when you get it heavy on both ends. It doesn't produce UV light. It doesn't really produce infrared light so much, but the visible spectrum it does. I don't have a spectrometer to test that to show you how much of each spectrum it is putting out, but we're going to go over that in a little bit here. The blue-red one here, the blue light is, like I said, is 10 1-watt chips, and the red is 40 watt. And the reason why this is pulling 38 watts from the wall and not 50 watts, even though it says 50 watts, is because, like I said, it's the 1-watt diodes on there, which equates to a 50-watt total, but they're underdriven, which means that they're given less power. What this is for longevity mostly. It produces a little less heat. You're going to get a little less light output, yes, but if it's going to be on for so many hours a day, it puts out a lot less heat and it consumes less energy, and that means it's going to last longer. This one over here is okay. It's meant really for outdoors, but it was never intended as a grow light. So this one here, I actually would cool this with a fan, because the back of it does get pretty hot. I don't think the heat sink is very efficient at cooling it, so I do add a cooling fan for that. And I would do it for this one too, because it's only going to help it. So getting back to what I was talking about, the different kinds of LED lights. There's panels, which has an array of small LEDs across the whole thing, so you get a big light spread, and some of them will have different lenses on them to spread the light or focus the light, depending on how tall your plant is. If you got a tall plant, you need more light penetration, so you focus it, you get more intensity straight down. The ones that spread means it just covers a broader area. You don't get quite the intensity, but all in all, the overall intensity is actually the same. It's just one's condensing it and one's not. So originally, the original grow panels that they had out were comprised, they had a lot of 1-watt diodes. They're mostly 1 watt. And then they came out with 3-watt, and then they have 5-watt diodes, and they got 10-watt diodes. From what I've learned is that the most efficient ones are 3-watt diodes, and that's because they're cheaper to manufacture, for one. That means the panels you buy are going to be cheaper overall, and they're more abundant, and you could you can put them next to each other on the boards and they produce less heat, so that means you can put them closer together so you can get it more in the same panel, more light. So that's really why the 3 watt is good. If you go up to 5 watt and 10 watt, the chips can't be quite as close together. It means you have less light on the panel, less diodes, and that's really going to give you the more heat on the board. So it consumes more power. In the future, this could really advance, this could change, but for now, currently making this video, 3 watts are apparently the best way to go. That's what I've learned. So don't take my word for it, do your own research, but I've done a lot of research myself, and that's what I've learned. So I want to get into talking about the charts as well, as far as, nope, it's down here on the floor. So if you look at this chart here, when you go to the store and you buy a light, like say a fluorescent light, a compact fluorescent, or you buy an LED light, which are new. LED lights and fluorescent lights, compact fluorescent lights, CFLs, will say a 60 watt or something like that. It'll say 60 watt equivalent. Most of you people should know by now that it's not pulling 60 watts from the wall. It'll say equivalent, and it'll say something like 9 watts or 23 watts, something like that, depending on the wattage you get. It actually pulls that little bit of wattage from the wall. It's the same thing with LEDs. LEDs can be slightly more efficient than those compact fluorescents, but they're about the same in relativity. You're talking about penny pinching, really, when it comes to wattage. So those lights that you get are just pulling those. But when you get grow lights, the amount of light that you need to grow plants is actually a lot. It's a lot more than you can't just go to get one compact fluorescent light or one LED light, something like that, because it's not going to be bright enough. And the way you base it off of when you buy those is lumens, because wattage is an old term used to interpret how bright something is, and it's not true anymore. Wattage is just the amount of energy consumed. You go by lumens these days. So lumens, if you look at this chart here, I'm going to get a little closer to the camera so you can see this. This is the lumen chart here. So this is what the human eye response is. It says it right there. Human eye is most sensitive to like green, yellow light. That is where it peaks right here. And that's how, when you have like a lumen meter, it actually bases off of that. So when you talk about light intensity, it's what the human eye is most sensitive to. So it's this right here. This here is the photosynthetic response chart, PAR. So this is showing you what plants see, not what humans see. Well, humans see this. This is actually across the visible spectrum, but humans are not as sensitive to stuff in the ultraviolet blue area or the far red or red range. So if you can look at that, this is what the plants see, this is what humans see. You can't actually tell how bright something is just by looking at the color of the light, because the intensity is not something your eyes are sensitive to when you're looking at those ends of the spectrum. So in both charts, they're both, I know we're looking at 750 up here, but don't worry about that, because what plants use, PAR, or photosynthetically active radiation, a term that pretty much anyone can say and make them sound like a genius, but that's really all it is. It's just what chlorophyll absorbs in the spectrum. So 400 to 700 nanometer, that is the range that is visible. Beyond that, lower than 400 is UV, higher than 700 is infrared, something that you cannot see. Plants do use, like if you heard in the narration, they do use a little bit of UV, but as you can see at the end of the chart here, it drops off very quickly, so it only uses a very little bit. And then above that, in the infrared range, above 700, plants use, this is very debatable, they do use a little bit of it, a very small amount. It's not quite that important. If you look down here at the bottom of the chart, this is actually what the chlorophyll response is right here. So this is the peak light spectrums that chlorophyll is absorbing. And if you actually look at the human eye response, it's also, it's almost a polar opposite between this one and this one. So plants see the opposite of what we do in a sense. So they see mostly in the blue and the red where these peaks are. So the other part of the chart here is just showing where you got the different pigments. So you got chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and B-carotene, or keratin, however you want to pronounce it. And there's some other pigments in there, as I discussed in the narration, which are accessory pigments. They're not quite as important as the red and the blue. That is the peak response for plants. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the peak absorption as far as the where they absorb it the most, which is around 460 nanometers, which is in the blue range, and 630 nanometers, which is in the red spectrum. So that's not exact, it's right around there, and that's where it peaks at. So if you give a plant mostly red or blue light, it's going to respond very well, it's going to grow very well. You don't necessarily need all white light, even though this is also debatable. You can use all white light, and it's actually going to probably give you a better result. But talking about growing stuff indoors, to be efficient about it, you don't necessarily need that. Mostly what the plants need is red and blue, and that's pretty much it. And they can do without the UV, they can do without the infrared, they can do without the yellow and the green. Outside, nature, plants have adapted to the sun, and they do use all parts of the spectrum, but the other parts of the spectrum that they use are for aiding in the growth process. So it's not really all there just to grow the plant. If you eliminate red and blue light and you just try to grow a plant with, say, green, ultraviolet, and infrared, you're not much is going to happen. Let's put it that way. So if you put a green light in a grow tent, grow box, whatever, it's not really going to grow. Nothing's really going to happen. It's just pure green light. And the reason why that is because it's an accessory pigment. So it aids the growth. So there is a response that the plant gives or gets. And this is scientifically tested and everything. There's all kinds of math and science behind it. But it's really up for debate if it's really completely necessary for the plants to grow. If you're just growing something inside, not outside. This is two different things we're talking about here. Then we have something else talking about the PAR. So in order to actually know how much light a plant needs, which is actually around 700 and 1500, between 700 and 1500 PAR. You go above 1500 PAR on a plant, you're going to get light burn. Below 700, it's going to grow fine, but it's just going to go slower. It's probably not going to grow quite as well. Whatever you're growing, herbs, fruits, vegetables, may not grow quite as well. It may not taste as good, whatever. So actually, if you change the light spectrum, so during certain phases of the plant's growth, if you adjust the spectrum according to how the plant's growing through its phases, you can actually completely change the flavor of what you're growing, the flavor, the smell, the taste. That can all be adjusted just by manipulating the light color of the spectrum. So as far as all that goes and how to do it, I don't know personally. It is something that's been tested and proven and everything. It actually is quite amazing. So like, basil, if you're growing basil, you can change the taste of it quite a bit just by changing the color of the light, which is neat. The penetrating power of the light, which I just talked about, between the 700 and 1500 PAR, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a guide to go by. So ideally, if you wanted to grow, the best possible crop or whatever you're growing, you want the most light. But you gotta be careful of how close you get the light to it, because you got heat to worry about, and that's what's so good about LED lights. So I'll show you what these lights look like here, and you'll see the difference between them. Let me just plug these in for you real quick. So there you have it. It's probably going to look a little blue on the camera, but this is white, and that would be the full spectrum. So it's really bright. I can barely even look at it. You really shouldn't, actually, because it's really not good for your eyes. It does put out a lot of intense light. And then the other one, take a second for it to, okay, yeah. So I just looked at it a little bit, and that's pretty blinding. And that's also not good to look at too, because your eyes don't interpret that as bright. Even though if I look at it, it's bright. Say you turn it, upside down, and you look at it, just the reflection of everything, it might look a little dim because it's like this purpley pink color, but your eyes aren't sensitive enough to see that, so it actually could be damaging to your eyes if you look at it too long directly anyways. So that's what that looks like. Let's see if I've covered everything here. Lots of videos and manufacturers talk about the perfect spectrum of light, power output, and they do side-by-side comparisons showing all kinds of numbers and such, but not a whole lot of apples-to-apples comparisons, especially using them for what they're designed for, which is actually growing plants. And you know, they can use spectrometers and analyzers and meters and all that stuff. What we're looking at is how well just using the red and blue spectrum works as opposed to using full spectrum, and also the differences between the wattages. So what we want to know is how it affects it. And the first thing we want to do actually is do them both at the same distance from the plant. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off the plants, because I don't have a hydroponic setup and I'm not all that familiar with it yet. The ideal situation would be like putting an all hydroponic solution, both of them in the same solution, so the pH and the nutrients are all identical, and then using clones of a plant so that the genetics are exactly the same. So that would be ideal. In this situation, we're not going to do that because I don't have that set up. So what we're going to do is power by numbers. So we're going to do 4 plants under each light. We're going to start them from seed, and then they're all going to start at the same rate. They're all going to get used to the light that they're under from seed. So we're not going to start them under the same light because that would kind of skew the results, because if you move the plant from that light to a different kind of light, such as the pink-purple light here, it can really adversely affect the plant because you're completely changing what it's been used to. So we're going to grow them from seed as seedlings at the same distance from the light. We'll see how that comes out. Then the next test we'll do is we'll do them at different distances, and the reason why I say that is because one light is underdriven, the power from the wall is lower than this one, even though they both say 50 watts. We're going to use a power meter, and we're going to make sure that the par number that we see on there is identical. So we may have to raise or lower one or the other so that the plant is receiving the same par number. And that's something I don't see a lot of. I just see like them putting them at certain distances, and it's really not an apples to apples comparison, because when you do that, you're not really doing it properly, because you want to be able to compare spectrum. So if you're comparing white light to this other light, what PAR is actually doing, the PAR number is across the entire visible spectrum from 400 to 700. It's not just taking into account the red and the blue, and just showing you the numbers on those. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the intensity is the same for both lights to the plants. And the intensity matters the most. So between the red and blue spectrum, if the intensity is just coming from red and blue light and it matches this intensity, what we would be doing is comparing how they respond to just those light spectrums as opposed to the broad spectrum with the white light. So let's get over to the plants, and then we'll get our experiment started. Just for the sake of this video is already so long, I'm not going to show the whole growth process and everything and comment through the entire thing. It's just going to be kind of like a picture of a start, and then we'll show it when it's done, and then we'll compare weight. The one downside to doing this is the biggest thing is plants, in order for them to flower or fruit, they need a lot of red light. So as I said in the narration, this light here is going to have more red light than this one. At least I'm assuming, because there's 40 of these chips in here, 40 of the diodes in here are red. So it's going to give it more. So we can't really compare too much of the flowering and fruiting and how much more, because obviously the red light's probably going to win in that case. But what we're going to look at is the overall height, the node spacing. We'll see if they're stretching, stuff like that. That's going to give us the best comparison, mostly in the vegetative state of growth. And if you don't know, if you're trying to flower or fruit a plant, what you do is you switch it over to a 12-12 light cycle, and that triggers the growth of the flowering, and so that you can produce your fruits and vegetables or whatever. Now they do grow, they can grow under 18 hours of light, it happens, but to really convert over to a flowering mode, you need 12 hours of darkness uninterrupted, and that's where the green lights come in. Green light's in a grow room is so it doesn't disturb your plants during the night, because the plants don't really see the green light. Like I said, they use it, but it's not going to wake them up. So that's a little background behind that. So let's get started with that.